Hello, friends. I'm happy to welcome you all to this very special episode of the Thought Leadership Show from Quadrant Knowledge Solutions, where we invite business and technology leaders to share their leadership perspectives in various areas. Our guest speaker today is Mr. Bill Schmarzo, who is called the Dean of Big Data. He's the customer advocate for data management innovation at Dell Technologies. Welcome, Bill. Welcome to this show, and thanks for your participation. It's an absolute pleasure to have you in the show.
Thank you. Well, thanks for inviting me. I'm very eager to see what sort of devious questions you have geared up for me here.
Okay, just to give our audience a brief profile about you. Bill is an author and avid blogger. He's a professor and a frequent speaker on the use of big data and data science to power an organization's key business initiatives. He has over 3 decades of experience in data warehousing, business intelligence, and analytics. So it's our privilege to have Mr. Bill Schmarzo on this show, who will be talking on the data science and data management and various aspects of its organization and the challenges involved. So, Bill, I'm just coming to the first question. So what is most important or the priority for business leaders today who are trying to operationalize the data management or monetize their data for business growth?
So I think the most important question, and the question that tends to get overlooked, is a really solid understanding for how does the organization create value and measure the effectiveness of their value creation processes. When in the data management, data science, data strategy space, all those conversations start with the wrong word. They start with data, right? And I believe that the conversation needs to start with value. What's important to the organization? How do they create value for their customers, their products, their stakeholders? And how do they measure that value creation process? And when you get into that conversation regarding how do they measure their value creation, this is where you get into some really provocative, insightful, difficult conversations. Because I think for us in the AI ML space, if we don't have a more holistic set of variables and KPIs against which we're trying to optimize, we risk building models that have confirmation bias. And so it's up to us as data scientists or citizens of data science, citizens of AI and ML, to make sure that we've had this holistic conversation about, okay, when you talk about value, yeah, there's financial value, there's operational value, there's customer value beyond just revenue. There's satisfaction, net promoter score, there's employees, there's partners, there's environmental, there's society, there's all kinds of other definitions of value that organizations need to wrestle with, because if we don't get that right, then we are going to have AI models that do things that we don't want them to do.
True. Yeah, that's very practical observation. That leads to the next question. How can a growing organization transform data management from an information technology, that's IT task, into a business-centric discipline to empower the business for unleashing the economic value of the organization's data for driving both growth and innovation?
So to me, that's the heart of the challenge we face as data specialists, is making data not something that's just governed by a high priesthood of data engineers and data scientists. How do we get data down to a level where everybody understands what it is and how they can use it to help make better or more informed decisions in an imperfect world? Because that's what we're really trying to do, right? We're trying to help the stakeholders, whether they're at the front lines of customer engagement, whether they're running the operation of the business. How do they make better decisions using what's in the data? How do I know when to replace a part, or when a part breaks? How do I know, what kind of inventory am I going to need? What kind of equipment am I going to need? Who's the best person to replace that? So I'm constantly making decisions, not just in the workforce or in the enterprise, but across our individual life. So I'm always trying to make decisions. And so I think it's up to us as data practitioners to really help to not make data sound so complicated, especially data science. Let's simplify. Let's make sure it's easy to understand so that people can look at when they're trying to make decisions. And I think the classic problem we saw recently is on COVID vaccinations. Do you get a vaccination or not? I mean, there was a lot of debate, and if you got rid of the political stuff of it, there was still lots of data that was really not crystal clear, right? It was not 100% clear whether getting a vaccination would prevent me from dying from COVID or not, but it did improve my odds. And that's part of the challenge I think we have as data practitioners, is to get this conversation down to a point where the people we're working with, whether it's an enterprise or across society, are understanding where and how they can use this data to make more informed decisions in this very imperfect world.
Correct. So the next question will be the next part of the earlier question, that aligning data strategy and technology strategy with business strategy and goals is very important for any organization to leapfrog and become sustainable in long term. So what are your observations and recommendations in this area, whether this thing is happening as per the prescribed way, or you suggest some kind of more roadmap for this?
Yeah, so I don't think, Shekhar, that we're seeing a real big uptick in this. In fact, there was a recent study done by Thomas Davenport and Randy Bean, and it was talking about the struggles that organizations are having in becoming data-driven. And in fact, over the past 4 years, the percentage of companies across 5 different dimensions that are becoming data-driven had actually fallen. We'd actually gone backwards over the past 4 or 5 years. We state that data is the most valuable resource in the world. We state that data is the economic catalyst for the growth in the 21st century. So we have all this stuff around us that says data is critically important, but yet organizations are actually regressing and becoming data driven. And I think the heart of that problem, getting back to the business strategy conversation, is that we spend, again, too much time talking about data and not enough time talking about value. And the conversation should be, the data conversation should start with the business strategy. What is business trying to accomplish? What are you about? And I really want to drill into the KPIs and metrics against which the enterprise or the business measures its effectiveness, its success. Because the KPIs and metrics against which they measure success says more about the culture of an organization than any artificially created mission statement. We are what we measure, and we actually measure what we reward. And what I mean by that is what you pay people to do is what your corporation is about, what your company is about. So if we're paying, just increased revenue and sales, then that's what we are. But if we're also got a mix in there about customer satisfaction, employee satisfaction, partner satisfaction, we have some things around environmental and it's impacting how people get paid, then that's who we are.
True. But do you think there is some kind of missing link from the CEO of an organization and the data management leader?
Yeah, so I think a lot of people point to the CDO, Chief Data Officer, as being kind of that missing link. The person who is responsible for ideally sitting at the same management level, reporting to the CEO, whose job is to figure out across all these different departments and business units, where can the organization leverage data and analytics to become more effective? So I think this role of Chief Data Officer, in fact, I've called it a Chief Data Monetization Officer, because maybe monetization is the wrong term, but it's a Chief Data Value Officer whose job is to figure out where and how do I apply data across the different parts of the business to drive value. I think that CDO role is very important. And the good news is, I think that role is growing in importance. When the first CDOs came out, they all reported to the CIO. The CDO is basically a CIO mini-me. And what's happened over time is the CDO has grown in importance. They now sit as an equal footing with the CIO. They're solving different problems. And an effective CDO is sitting at the same level as a chief operating officer, as a chief marketing officer, as a chief financial officer, as a chief revenue officer. They're at that same level, so they're trying to. That chief data officer owns data as an economic asset and owns trying to apply that to different parts of the organization. I mean, they're as much a profit center in driving value across the organization as any other part of the organization is.
True, true. So with this, would you like to highlight the pain points and challenges in data management? What would be your advice to organizations for addressing them?
So I think there's all kinds of challenges in data management. It's hard to find what data I have. It's hard to get easy access to it. We spend too much time moving data around and put them into these different data repositories, a data mark, a data lake, a data lakehouse. We have, we don't collect insights around how people are using the data so that we can provide recommendations back to them. So there's lots of things at the data management level that are challenges for us. But we recently ran a workshop, excuse me, and are running a series of workshops with some of our customers where we're walking through this data management journey to understand what are the pain points and going from a business need to a business outcome. How do I leverage data and analytics to accelerate that? I've got a business need or I got a business idea. How do I drive a business outcome? And as we walk people through, it was really illuminating. They told us where the pain points were. They told us where the challenges were. They told us what more we needed to do. There was lots of great ideas, but everyone said the biggest problem they have is at the very beginning, we don't define what it is we're trying to do. We don't spend enough time up front really scoping the problem we're trying to solve, understanding who the stakeholders are, how it's going to impact them, what are the measures and KPIs against which they're going to measure effectiveness, how does that create value to the organization? There's this upfront work that, by the way, should tie to the business strategy, right? How does what we're going to do here tie to the overarching strategy? Because if we clearly define that upfront, that business need, that business idea, that business aspiration. Now, as I move down through the data management journey, I know what data is important. I know what data is not important. I know what transformations I need to work on, which ones don't need to work on. The problem with data management is we start the conversation from a data perspective, and because we don't know what data is most valuable, we treat it all the same way. And there's clearly some data sets that are much more valuable than other ones. If you really want to stump a CIO, ask them, what's your most important data sets? And they're like, they don't know. Why? Because you can't determine the value of a data set in isolation of the business. You have to have that business conversation. So we heard time and time again is help us make certain that we've clearly defined the problem we're going to go after before we start that whole journey, because then I can really accelerate my way through that.
Okay, then I would like to come to my last question.
Last question. This is quick. I thought for sure you'd be grilling me a lot more.
Yeah, the last question is a little bigger one. Probably you will to elaborate more on that part. That's why I kept it in the last. So it was said earlier that data is the new oil, but you also mentioned that it is more like an economic asset now. So that will prove to be the biggest catalyst for growth in the 21st century. So would you like to share your thoughts on this?
So as backdrop, I think the phrase data is the new oil is the most powerful phrase that I've heard since I've been in this industry, and I have been in it for over 40 years. And it's not because data has, characteristics of oil, although it's, you can refine it and you can burn it and you have to you store it. No. The real point of that statement, data is the new oil, is that from an economics perspective, in the same way that oil was the fuel that drove the economic power, drove the economics of the 20th century, the data will be that catalyst that drives the economic growth in the 21st century. It's an economics conversation. And a reason why this is important, going back to some of your earlier questions, is that if we want to get the attention of the business stakeholders, the people around which we're trying to apply data and analytics to help them be more successful, if we want to catch their attention, do not talk about data. Do not talk about data science. Do not talk about neural networks and machine learning and regression. Don't talk about Kafka and Link and Flink and BOP and blah, right? No, let's talk about economics, because what is economics? Economics is about the creation and distribution of value. Economics is a value-based conversation. So if we can frame data as an economic asset, not an IT asset, not a byproduct of the operations of the IT, if we can frame it as an economic asset, if I can frame it as an economic asset, I now have the right to walk into a CEO and tell him, you have economic assets in your organization that you are not leveraging. You have these economic assets that you think about data, right? If I have data, so it's shareable. I don't not have data silos, but I have it in an environment where I can share it across the organization, right? A same data set never depletes, never wears out. And the same data set can be used across an infinite number of use cases at zero marginal cost. You have no other assets that act like that. That's number one. But I can also build analytic processes, policies, devices, products, with the inclusion of AI and ML, that the more that they use, the smarter they get. That these assets, these assets and processes, they don't depreciate like you would think about from an accounting perspective. They don't depreciate the more you use them. They actually appreciate. They get smarter. These are two really powerful concepts that you can walk up to a CEO and say, you are missing the most powerful economic drivers in the 21st century, because you think about it as being the CIO's problem. You think about being the CDO's problem, but in reality, CEO, Mr. and Mrs. CEO, it's your problem. It's your problem. And if you as a CEO aren't demanding accountability across the entire organization for how are we more effectively leveraging data and analytics as an economic asset, then that's your fault, Mr. and Mrs. CEO. So I think this is a really powerful opportunity for all of us who have been in this data conversation for so long to change the frame, to no longer be, if we are the tail of the dog, then by golly, we're going to start wagging the dog. Because I think we have an opportunity, and I'm going to argue that for all of us in this data space, we have an obligation to march up to the business leaders and explain to them and talk to them and convince, and not just convince them, but to clarify to them why this is an economic asset. And if we do that, I think our role in an organization transforms entirely. We now become critical to the business. And the demands on us are going to change though too. So be careful, right? Be careful what you ask for. So the ability to share data means you got to get rid of data silos, right? We got to stop moving data to the analytics. We got to start moving analytics to data. We got to accelerate our ability to analyze data as it comes ingest and infer it in real time. So our world is going to change, but it's going to change not because new technology is coming along. There's always new technology. It's going to change because there's new business and economic demands on our profession.
Perfect. Thanks for your participation in the show. You really touched upon very eye-opening aspects of data science, and I'm sure this can be really an eye-opener for all the organizations and their CEOs. I think it's the need of the hour, and going forward, all the organizations, especially the CEOs, need to take into account the data management, the exact organized data management, and consider it as an important aspect of the organization's growth in future.
Thank you. Well, this is a passion of mine. And so thank you very much for the opportunity to be on the show.
Yes.
The questions were great. It was a lot of fun.
Thanks a lot again for your participation. And I look forward to connecting with you again in future.
Thank you. Very much appreciated. Thank you.
Bill. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.